The council chamber had never felt so heavy with silence. Across its vast domed ceiling, shimmering stars projected from hollow screens seemed dimmer than usual, as if the galaxy itself sensed the weight of what had just unfolded. At the center of the hall, where representatives of countless worlds usually exchanged speeches full of pomp and politeness, there was only an echo of footsteps and the fading presence of a delegation that had just walked out. Humanity, the youngest but most unpredictable member of the Galactic Council, had withdrawn from peace talks, and in that single decision, centuries of delicate diplomacy trembled. No one had expected it to end like this. For years, the Galactic Council had considered humanity a curious anomaly, a species late to the stars but eager to make their mark. At first, they had been underestimated, seen as fragile creatures from a blue planet on the spiral arm, armed with outdated fleets and naive ideals. Yet, in record time, humans had forced the galaxy to take notice. They expanded faster than anyone thought possible, fought harder when cornered, and most dangerously, they refused to bend in the way other species had long ago learned to do. And now, by walking away from negotiations that were supposed to end hostilities across multiple star systems, they had shifted the balance of power in ways that no one was ready to admit aloud. The chamber had been designed to inspire awe. Towering seats curved in perfect order around a central podium, each one occupied by beings of every imaginable form, scaled, feathered, crystalline, luminous, mechanical. They had debated wars, trade routes, and the ethics of genetic engineering within these walls, always believing themselves wise enough to manage the galaxy's chaos. But when the human delegation rose and gave their final words before turning their backs, a strange chill ran through the assembly. For the first time, the council realized they had mistaken stubbornness for weakness. Humanity's silence was not surrender. It was a warning. What made the moment more unsettling was how calm the human envoy had been. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic display. They simply listened, endured the endless speeches, the subtle insults, the quiet dismissals, and then, with a measured tone, announced their withdrawal. The words still echoed in the minds of those present. We will not return until respect is given, not demanded. If peace is to be built, it will not be built upon our silence. With that, they left. The doors sealed behind them, and the chamber felt colder than any void outside. Behind the polished manners of the council, fear was already brewing. Humanity's reputation was complex. They were builders and explorers eager to trade and share, but history had proven they were also capable of unrelenting war. When threatened, humans did not retreat to lick their wounds. They adapted, they resisted, and they came back stronger. The Council had seen flashes of this resilience before. Battles on forgotten frontiers, rebellions crushed not with overwhelming firepower but with sheer human endurance, treaties negotiated only after humanity forced the galaxy to recognize them as equals. Some thought humanity would always remain the wild card species, unpredictable but ultimately containable. Now, no one was sure. The younger delegates whispered among themselves, wondering if the humans would return with fleets massed at council borders. Others reassured themselves with illusions, that humanity was still too small, too fractured, too dependent on others. Yet deep down, they all remembered the old reports. Outnumbered 10-1, humans had once held their ground long enough to force armistices. Outgunned, they had turned asteroids into weapons. Outmatched in technology, they had learned to innovate in desperate hours. Where other species calculated survival through compromise, humanity had always defied the odds with sheer determination. The chamber's presiding voice finally broke the silence, a layered tone that filled the hall with forced calm. It spoke of patience, of the need to wait, of the assurance that humans would eventually return to the table. But the words rang hollow. The delegates shifted uneasily in their seats. For in their hearts, many of them already sensed the truth. Peace had been within their grasp, but arrogance had pushed it away. They had dismissed humanity's warnings, thinking them bluff or bluster. They had mistaken humanity's desire for peace as proof of weakness, and now that mistake might cost the galaxy more than it was prepared to pay. Outside the chamber, news of the withdrawal spread like fire across the stars. Networks broadcast the human envoy's final words on every channel, and reactions rippled through systems both allied and hostile. Some cheered, seeing humanity as a beacon of defiance against the Council's self-appointed authority. Others panicked, fearing that if humanity truly withdrew, the fragile balance of power would shatter. Trade partners worried about broken routes. Border colonies braced for instability. And on Earth, on Mars, on the distant frontier stations where human settlers carved lives from the void, the message was received with quiet resolve. They had been patient long enough, yet no one knew what humanity's next move would be. Would they turn inward, focusing only on their colonies, building strength in silence? Would they reach out to those dissatisfied with the Council, forging dangerous alliances in the shadows? Or would they prepare for something greater, a move that would shake the galaxy more than any war or treaty ever had? For now, the galaxy could only wait. The Council might try to downplay the withdrawal, calling it temporary or symbolic. But in the quiet spaces between the stars, captains, diplomats, and even common citizens whispered a different truth. Humanity had made its choice, and that choice was not surrender. It was a step away from a table where respect was never given, only demanded, and so the stage was set. The Council had realized too late that the very species they had underestimated might be the one to decide the fate of countless worlds. As the echoes of the humans' departure faded, a question lingered in every mind, unresolved and unsettling. When humanity returned, what would they bring with them? Peace, or something far more unstoppable? The answer would not come today. The chamber remained in its uneasy silence, the Council unwilling to face the weight of their mistake. But somewhere beyond the rim, ships moved in formation, colonies tightened their bonds, and humanity prepared in ways no one yet understood. The galaxy had been warned, and warnings, when ignored, have a way of becoming something far more dangerous. Would the Council's mistake unravel everything they had built? Or would humanity once again defy every expectation and reshape the stars on their own terms? That answer waits in the shadows of what comes next. In the days that followed humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy could not stop talking. Every station, every colony, every world under the Galactic Council's influence seemed caught in the same discussion. The recordings of the human envoy's speech played again and again, analyzed by commentators, dissected by scholars, and whispered about in marketplaces. Some claimed it was a bluff, that humans were simply staging a grand performance to force concessions. Others argued it was no bluff at all, that humanity had reached its breaking point, and the galaxy was about to discover what that really meant. For centuries, the Galactic Council had prided itself on keeping peace through diplomacy. Yet peace often came at the cost of smaller voices being ignored or drowned out by the larger powers. Many civilizations had accepted that reality long ago, believing compromise was the only way to survive among giants. Humanity had entered the Council with optimism, believing that if they worked hard enough, their ideas of fairness and mutual respect could change old traditions. At first, their energy had been welcomed. Their stories of struggle and survival resonated with smaller species who had felt the same frustration. But soon enough, the great powers of the Council began to see humans not as equals, but as tools, useful when convenient, silenced when not. The background of their discontent stretched years into the past. When border disputes erupted near human colonies, the Council's judgment had been slow and biased. When pirate fleets raided trade lines, humanity's pleas for stronger protection had been brushed aside. Even when humans provided soldiers and resources to defend distant worlds that were not their own, gratitude was short-lived, replaced quickly by dismissal. Each slight had been endured, each insult swallowed, until patience finally ran out. The peace talks were supposed to be the turning point, the moment humanity was finally acknowledged as an equal contributor to the galaxy's future. Instead, it became the breaking point. Back on Earth, the news was received with a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger because once again the galaxy had shown its arrogance. Relief because their leaders had at last chosen dignity over compromise. Crowds gathered in city squares, watching the broadcasted words of their envoys on massive screens. In the orbital stations above Mars, Workers paused in their routines to listen, some nodding quietly, others clenching their fists with determination. On the distant frontier colonies where life was harsher and survival demanded resilience, there was almost no surprise. They had long suspected the Council would never treat humanity as more than pawns. To them, the withdrawal was not weakness, it was freedom. But not everyone was so certain. Among the humans themselves, there were voices of doubt. Some feared that leaving the talks would isolate them, cutting off vital trade and alliances. Others worried that their defiance would provoke war, and humanity's young fleets were not ready to stand against the combined forces of the Council's powers. Even so, most agreed on one thing. The path they had chosen was theirs alone. For too long they had played by rules that were never written with them in mind. Now they would write their own. The Galactic Council, however, struggled to keep control of the narrative. In private chambers, the senior delegates debated furiously, though their public statements were calm and carefully worded. They spoke of patience, insisting that humanity would soon return, that their passion was temporary, that their departure was only symbolic. Yet behind closed doors, worry seeped into every conversation. If humanity's withdrawal emboldened other dissatisfied species, cracks would begin to spread across the Council's foundation. Already murmurs of unrest grew louder from worlds on the fringes, civilizations that had long tolerated being overshadowed by stronger voices. Humanity's act of defiance had given them something dangerous: inspiration. Suspense only grew as strange reports began to surface. Human fleets were seen moving in unusual patterns, no longer stationed near Council-aligned space, but instead massing near the frontier. Supply ships disappeared into uncharted regions, their destinations unknown. Colonies that had once been open and bustling now restricted foreign traffic, their ports guarded by watchful eyes. The Council claimed it was routine, that humans were simply reassigning resources, but those who had studied humanity's history felt otherwise. They recognized the signs of preparation. What unsettled the Council most was the unpredictability. Humanity had always thrived on surprise. When underestimated, they had turned that doubt into strength. When cornered, they had fought with tenacity that outlasted even superior forces. No simulation, no algorithm, no Council strategy had ever managed to predict them accurately. And now, with humanity silent, there was no telling what was coming. The galaxy's smaller civilizations watched carefully, caught between fear and hope. Some reached out quietly, sending secret envoys to human colonies, testing whether alliances could be formed outside the Council's reach. Others hesitated, afraid of angering the larger powers who still held sway. But the thought lingered in every heart. If humanity could stand against the Council, maybe they could too. The human delegation, meanwhile, returned to their home worlds with little fanfare, as if the withdrawal had been a simple, natural step. Yet beneath their calm exteriors, there was urgency. Meetings stretched late into the night. Discussions turned into plans, and plans into action. Humanity was not retreating, they were reorganizing. The galaxy, however, would not know this until much later. All it saw was silence, and silence can be more frightening than open defiance. On the frontier, whispers spread of experimental ships being tested in hidden shipyards, of colonies training militias under the guise of local defense, of alliances being forged in places the Council's reach had always been weak. None of these rumors could be confirmed, but the very existence of the whispers unsettled the balance. It was not just the fleets or the weapons that worried the Council, it was the will behind them. Humanity had shown again and again that once united by a common cause, they were almost impossible to stop. And still, the question remained unanswered. What exactly did humanity intend? Were they preparing for war? Or were they preparing for something far more subtle, something that would rewrite the galaxy's future without a single shot fired? Every possibility was weighed, every outcome feared. The uncertainty was its own weapon, and humanity wielded it with silence. Time stretched and tension grew. The stars above carried on with their endless cycles, indifferent to the struggles of those beneath. Yet in every corner of the galaxy, from glittering capital worlds to struggling colonies, people looked to the horizon of space and wondered when the humans would make their move. No one knew what shape it would take, but everyone knew one truth: the galaxy would not be the same once they did. The stage had been set, the players were moving, and the Council's mistake hung over everything like a shadow. What humanity would choose next remained a mystery, but that mystery was already changing the galaxy in ways the Council could no longer control. And as silence stretched into days, the suspense only grew sharper. Humanity had walked away from the table, but their absence spoke louder than words, and every passing moment carried the same question into the void. What would they bring when they finally returned? Rumors became the lifeblood of the galaxy. Whispers of hidden fleets and secret gatherings slipped between trading outposts, carried on encrypted channels, exchanged in hushed tones at orbital docks. No one had seen the humans openly prepare for war, but no one could dismiss the patterns. Their colonies were closing themselves off, their supply lines shifted in strange ways, and their diplomats had gone silent. That silence was louder than any declaration. It forced the Council to look at every shadow as a possible threat, every movement as a sign of something greater unfolding just beyond their reach. The tension grew thicker with each passing week. Worlds that once trusted the Council began to falter. Merchants complained of delayed convoys, miners muttered about unsafe borders, and soldiers stationed on the outer rim tightened their patrols. Everyone expected the first shot could come at any moment, yet nothing came. Humanity's fleets were seen, yes, but only in formation, never in attack. Their envoys sent no demands, their leaders gave no threats. It was as if they were waiting, biding their time, letting the weight of their absence gnaw at the Council. That quiet patience was what unsettled the galaxy most. Inside the Council's great chamber, the debates grew more desperate. Some delegates urged immediate reconciliation, send envoys to Earth, offer concessions, admit mistakes. Others refused, their pride too entrenched. They argued that bending to humanity would show weakness, and weakness would invite rebellion from every corner of Council space. But even as they argued, their voices carried less conviction. Too many of them had studied human history. They knew this silence was not surrender. It was the sound of something gathering strength. Back on Earth, preparations pressed forward quietly but with relentless determination. Shipyards lit the skies above the oceans, constructing new vessels at a pace that startled even their own workers. Mars swarmed with activity, its dry deserts echoing with the sounds of drills and training regimens. On frontier worlds where settlers had long lived without Council protection, the people organized with new urgency, as if they finally knew their struggle would matter to the whole galaxy. Humanity was not telling anyone what they were planning, but every step they took showed one truth. They were preparing for something vast, and it wasn't just military power. Alliances were forming in places the Council rarely looked. Small civilizations, those tired of centuries of neglect, began to align with human envoys. They were not formal treaties, not yet, but quiet exchanges of promises. If the Council could not give them respect, maybe humanity could. Some of these worlds had little to offer in terms of fleets or weapons, but they had loyalty born from shared frustration. And loyalty in uncertain times was worth more than armies. The galaxy's larger powers grew restless. They had long relied on the Council to keep order, to ensure no single species rose too far above the others. Humanity's silence broke that illusion. If humans were allowed to walk away without consequence, the entire structure might unravel. Patrols increased near human borders, fleets stationed themselves in defensive arcs, and propaganda filled the stars with messages about unity, peace, and trust in the Council. But the words fell flat. Too many had seen the footage of the humans' final speech. Too many remembered the tone of calm defiance. Tension reached even the most remote outposts. In lonely mining colonies on the edge of known space, workers kept one eye on the stars, half expecting human warships to appear without warning. Merchants in the core worlds debated whether to risk contracts with human traders, unsure if they would be seen as allies or traitors. Even ordinary citizens began to question their leaders. Was the Council truly in control? Or had humanity shown that the Council's authority was nothing more than fragile glass waiting to shatter? Meanwhile, within human space, the atmosphere was charged but united. Every broadcast spoke not of fear but of resolve. They remembered their history, The long centuries of struggle on their homeworld, the wars that had shaped their societies, the hardships endured on barren colonies where survival depended on grit and cooperation. These memories were not burdens. They were fuel. The Council had underestimated what those memories meant. To humanity, they were proof that nothing in the galaxy could break them once they decided to stand. And still, the mystery deepened. Reports of strange technologies being tested in secret reached Council ears. Some said humanity had developed new drives capable of reaching further into the void than ever before. Others claimed they had turned barren asteroids into weapons, hidden across the frontier like silent traps. None of these reports could be confirmed, but each rumor added to the Council's unease. Humanity was not boasting of its strength, it didn't have to. The galaxy itself carried their legend forward. At the same time, cracks began to appear within the Council itself. Smaller species grew tired of being silenced in debates. If humanity could walk away, why should they stay? Quiet coalitions began to form, not yet open, but enough to alarm the major powers. Some delegates argued that humanity's defiance was already reshaping the political order without a single battle. Others warned that if they didn't act soon, they might not get the chance to act at all. The stage was tightening, every move narrowing the space for diplomacy. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the first undeniable sign of humanity's next step. Would it be a fleet appearing at the edge of a Council world? A declaration broadcast across the stars? Or something even more unexpected? Then came the sightings. Scout ships near the frontier reported massive movements. Convoys of human vessels traveling in silence, escorted by warships whose markings had been stripped of any Council affiliation. They were not invading, not attacking, but relocating in numbers too large to ignore. Colonies were being fortified, defenses erected, starports expanded. It was as though humanity was building a network of strongholds, each one tied to the next, forming something greater than any Council simulation had predicted. The Council responded with urgency. Emergency sessions were called, fleets redirected, allies reminded of their obligations. But the problem was no longer just military. It was perception. Across the galaxy, billions of ordinary beings began to wonder. Perhaps humanity was not the problem. Perhaps the problem was the Council itself. The suspense grew unbearable. Every day without resolution felt like the quiet before a storm. Every report, every whisper, every rumor added another thread to the web of tension. Humanity's silence was no longer empty. It was a force pressing against the galaxy, reshaping it without a single declaration. And then came the moment that made the galaxy's pulse quicken. A human fleet appeared at the edge of a Council-controlled system, not in attack, not in defiance, but in absolute formation. Hundreds of ships moved as one, their drives blazing against the void, their silence louder than words. They did not fire a shot, did not send a message, but their very presence was enough. The Council knew then, with chilling certainty, that the climax was near. The galaxy waited, suspended between fear and anticipation. Every eye turned toward the humans, wondering what they would do, what they would demand, what they would unleash. The Council had made its mistake. Humanity had chosen its path. And now, standing at the edge of war or transformation, the only question left was how far humanity was willing to go. The moment stretched like a drawn breath, heavy and unbroken. And in that silence, everyone knew. The story was about to change forever. The fleet at the edge of Council space should have been enough to terrify the chamber into silence. But before the Council could even gather its courage to respond, another wave of reports arrived, ones that no one expected. Humanity was not alone. Alongside their ships, vessels of unfamiliar design were detected, ships that bore no record in the Council's long archives. They moved in tight formation, disciplined and precise, but their markings were not human. They were something else, something new. At first, many dismissed the sightings as errors, glitches in long-range scans caused by the sheer scale of the human fleet. But as transmissions poured in from multiple systems, the truth became harder to deny. Humanity had allies. Not just whispers of alliances, not just colonies or minor worlds, they had brought others into their orbit. civilizations so hidden or forgotten that the Council had no record of their strength. Suddenly, the balance of power was no longer a simple question of humanity versus the Council. It was something far more dangerous, the possibility that the galaxy itself was shifting beneath their feet. In the chamber, panic finally cracked through the Council's practiced calm. Delegates who had once spoken with arrogance now shouted over one another. Some demanded immediate confrontation, calling for fleets to intercept the humans before their coalition grew stronger. Others urged caution, afraid that an attack might provoke something they could not contain. For the first time in centuries, the great powers found themselves paralyzed, trapped between fear of losing control and fear of igniting something far worse. The humans, meanwhile, offered no explanation. Their fleets remained in silence, making no demands, sending no broadcasts. Their new allies mirrored their discipline, keeping their identities and intentions hidden. It was this quiet unity that unsettled the galaxy most. Humanity had always been unpredictable, but they had never been truly alone. Now, with others at their side, the unpredictability multiplied. Who were these allies? Where had they been? Why had they chosen to reveal themselves now under humanity's banner? Back on Earth, speculation ran wild. Citizens filled forums and public squares, debating what the new coalition meant. Some whispered that humanity had reached beyond known space, finding civilizations forgotten by the Council's maps. Others believed these allies had been watching for centuries, waiting for someone bold enough to challenge the Council's dominance. The truth was unclear, but the message was undeniable. Humanity had not withdrawn into isolation. They had expanded outward, building bridges where the Council had let walls stand. On the Council's frontier worlds, the effect was immediate. Small civilizations that had long endured neglect saw humanity's coalition and felt a surge of hope. If humans could build something new, perhaps they too could find a place in it. Quiet envoys began slipping away from Council-controlled territories, seeking human contact. Not all returned. But those who did spoke of promises, of respect, of fairness, of alliances built not on dominance, but on choice. This was the twist the Council had never imagined. They had assumed that humanity's departure would weaken them, that isolation would leave them vulnerable. Instead, humanity had turned absence into opportunity. They had forged a network beyond the Council's sight, an alternative vision of the galaxy that threatened the very foundation of Council authority. And the most terrifying part was that it wasn't built on war, not yet, but on the one thing the Council had failed to give: dignity. Still, not everyone trusted this coalition. Even among humans, there was unease. Who were these mysterious allies, and what promises had been made in secret? Some feared that in reaching outward, humanity had bound itself to forces it did not fully understand. Others believed it was worth the risk, that standing alone was no longer enough. In the quiet corners of human space, debates grew heated. But through it all, one truth united them. Whatever alliances had been made, they had been chosen freely. That freedom itself was worth defending. The Council could not afford to ignore the growing danger. Fleets were redeployed in greater numbers, patrols doubled, intelligence networks scrambled to gather information. Yet the more they searched, the more they realized how blind they had been. Too long they had looked only inward, focused on maintaining their structure, assuming the galaxy beyond their borders was empty or irrelevant. Humanity had shattered that illusion. Now the unknown itself loomed like a weapon, and the Council had no defense against it. The tension reached a breaking point when a series of border colonies suddenly cut their ties to the Council. These were not human settlements, but independent worlds that had endured decades of neglect. In carefully worded transmissions, they declared their neutrality. Some even hinted at their willingness to align with humanity's coalition. The Council's grip, once unshakable, was slipping faster than anyone had expected. Every defection added pressure. Every silence felt like betrayal waiting to unfold. On the frontier, where human and Council patrols brushed dangerously close, the risk of conflict grew sharper. A single spark, an accidental shot, a misinterpreted signal could ignite war across the stars. Commanders on both sides issued strict orders to avoid escalation, but tension has a way of fraying discipline. Every captain knew that at any moment the galaxy could tip into chaos. And yet, the humans still did not move. Their fleets held position. Their coalition ships remained silent. This patience, this refusal to strike first, built suspense to unbearable levels. The Council waited for demands, but none came. It was as if humanity was daring them to act, forcing them to reveal their own desperation before making any move of their own. But the greatest shock was still to come. As the Council scrambled to maintain control, new evidence emerged. Hidden archives, old reports, fragments of data long buried in neglected records. They suggested that some of humanity's new allies were not new at all. They were civilizations the Council had once known, long ago dismissed as too primitive or irrelevant to matter. Instead of fostering them, the Council had abandoned them. Instead of guiding them, the Council had forgotten them. And now those forgotten civilizations had returned, not under the Council's banner, but under humanity's. The realization was devastating. It was not just humanity they faced, but the ghosts of their own neglect. Every slight, every dismissal, every forgotten promise had come back in the form of alliances that the Council had thought impossible. Humanity had given those voices something the Council never had: a reason to rise. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Council admitted their mistake, they risked losing authority over the galaxy they had shaped for centuries. If they refused, they risked provoking a coalition strong enough to challenge their rule. Humanity had forced them into a position with no easy path, no compromise left, and the Council knew that whichever way they turned, the galaxy would never be the same again. As the fleets hung in silence at the edge of Council space, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Every eye turned toward the humans and their mysterious allies, waiting for the moment when silence would finally break. No one knew what that moment would bring: salvation, or the spark of a war that would consume them all. And as the uncertainty grew heavier, one truth became clear. The climax was no longer just about humanity and the Council. It was about the future of the galaxy itself, a future now hanging by the thinnest thread. The fleets hung in silence, a constellation of metal and fire suspended on the edge of history. For weeks the galaxy had waited, unsure which side would take the first step. Every starport, every colony, every capital world was tuned to the unfolding standoff. Humanity had gathered its fleets and allies, the Council had massed its defenders, and between them stretched a gulf heavy with tension. No one breathed easily. No one dared to move. It was a balance that could not last forever. The first break came not from warships or admirals, but from a single transmission. The humans finally spoke. The envoy's voice was calm, steady, echoing across thousands of channels. "We did not come here for war. We came here to remind the galaxy that dignity is not granted by decrees, nor withheld by councils. It is ours by right, as it is for all who live under the stars." The words were simple, yet they struck harder than weapons. They carried across the chamber into the homes of ordinary beings, into the hearts of those who had long felt ignored. But the Council was not ready to yield. Their presiding voice answered with defiance, accusing humanity of destabilizing the galaxy, of breaking unity, of dragging others into chaos. They demanded humanity disband its fleets, disavow its allies, and return to the table in silence. The response was broadcast across every channel, a show of authority meant to remind everyone who still held power. Yet instead of silencing the humans, it revealed the depth of the divide. For in that moment, humanity revealed its second card. Screens lit up with transmissions not from their ships, but from the colonies and civilizations the Council had abandoned. Voices long forgotten filled the stars with testimony of neglect, of dismissals, of promises broken. One after another, they declared their support for humanity's vision. Small voices, but together they formed a chorus that could not be ignored. It was not humanity alone challenging the Council. It was the forgotten galaxy rising to speak for itself. The Council chamber fell into chaos. Some delegates shouted for immediate surrender, fearing that the weight of public opinion would shatter their authority. Others demanded an attack, insisting that force would silence rebellion. But as their arguments spiraled, the human fleets made their move. They advanced, not in attack, but in a perfect wall of ships that entered Council space in disciplined formation. Weapons were armed but not fired, shields raised but not tested. They came not as invaders, but as a line drawn in the void. The tension reached its peak. Council fleets scrambled to respond, engines roaring as formations clashed in the darkness. For a heartbeat, the galaxy held on the edge of war. Sensors screamed, captains barked orders, and millions of lives braced for impact. Then, in a moment that stunned both sides, the human fleet stopped just outside weapons range and held position. It was a challenge without words. We will not fire first, but we will not back down. The silence that followed was unbearable. Council commanders hesitated, fingers hovering over triggers, eyes fixed on the wall of ships before them. They knew that if they fired, the galaxy would burn. But they also knew that if they did not, the Council's authority would fracture beyond repair. Every second stretched into eternity, and then the unexpected twist struck. As both fleets locked in a frozen standoff, transmissions erupted, not from humans, not from the Council, but from deep space. Ships of designs unseen before poured into the system, vast and ancient, carrying the unmistakable power of civilizations thought extinct. They were not allies of humanity, nor servants of the Council. They were something older, something waiting in silence for this moment. Their voices rang out in tones that resonated through every channel. You squabble over power, yet forget the stars are vast. You argue over dignity while the galaxy itself is dying. The revelation hit like a tidal wave. The new arrivals revealed what neither side had expected. Beyond the rim, a threat greater than either Council or humanity had noticed was stirring, a cosmic danger that ignored politics and borders alike. The newcomers had aligned with humanity not to overthrow the Council, but to prepare for what was coming. Humanity's coalition had not just been about respect or defiance. It had been about survival. The chamber froze. Pride and arrogance collapsed in an instant, replaced with something far heavier, realization. All the debates, all the arguments, all the demands had been nothing compared to what loomed beyond the stars. Humanity, once dismissed as reckless dreamers, had been the first to see the truth. Their silence, their preparation, their alliances, all had been steps toward facing the real enemy waiting in the darkness. The climax unfolded in raw clarity. Humanity stood unbroken, backed by civilizations once forgotten, now joined by ancient powers returning to warn of what lay ahead. The Council, cornered and humbled, faced the undeniable truth. They had mistaken defiance for arrogance, silence for weakness, and patience for surrender. And now, if they clung to pride, they would not only lose control, they would lose the galaxy itself. The fleets withdrew, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. Humanity had not come to conquer, but to reshape the order of the stars. They demanded not domination, but partnership. And with the ancient ships looming in the distance, the Council realized they had no choice but to listen. Yet just when resolution seemed to settle, the final twist struck deep. The ancient voices spoke once more, not with warning, but with judgment. They declared that the coming threat could not be faced by fragmented powers. A new order must be forged, one stronger than the Council, one that united rather than silenced. And to the astonishment of the galaxy, they named humanity as the foundation of that order. Not because of their strength, but because of their defiance, their will, their refusal to bow. The chamber erupted once more, but this time with shock, not denial. The Council had built the galaxy's order for centuries, yet in the space of days, they had been stripped of their authority. Humanity, the very species they had underestimated, had been chosen by powers older than memory to lead the galaxy into its next era. The climax closed with silence across every channel, a silence heavier than war. Humanity had won, not by firing a single shot, but by enduring, by uniting, and by preparing for a future larger than themselves. The Council's mistake had become the galaxy's turning point, and though the immediate conflict was resolved, the shadow of the coming threat lingered, vast and unknown, for while humanity had earned its place, the final words of the ancient ships echoed like thunder. The true test has not yet begun. The silence that followed the climax seemed to stretch across the stars themselves. Humanity stood in the center of a storm they had never truly sought but could no longer avoid. The council chamber, once filled with prideful voices and iron certainty, was now heavy with realization. The fleets that had stood ready to tear each other apart drifted quietly, their weapons cooling, their captains waiting for orders that never came. For the first time, the galaxy was not thinking about conquest or control, but about survival, unity, and the fragile thread that held them all together. The human envoy stepped forward again, their voice steady but softer now. "We did not come here to lead," they said, "but to remind everyone that no voice should be silenced. If the galaxy is to survive what is coming, it cannot be ruled by fear or arrogance. It must be guided by trust, by cooperation, and by the belief that we are stronger together." These words carried far beyond the chamber, out through the streams and transmissions into every corner of the known worlds. They were not the words of conquerors. They were the words of survivors who had learned the price of being underestimated and the weight of carrying responsibility no one else dared to take. For the council, the shift was painful. They had built their identity on control, on the certainty that they alone knew best. Now they were confronted with the undeniable truth that their power had blinded them. Some members left in silence, unwilling to face the shame. Others stayed, their expressions hardened not with anger but with reluctant acceptance. A few even stepped forward, offering their cooperation in what lay ahead. It was not surrender. It was something far more difficult: humility. As for humanity, the fleets slowly powered down, their captains relieved yet cautious. They had won the moment, but they knew the cost of what had come before. Entire generations had carried the scars of being overlooked, of having to prove themselves again and again. Now, standing at the edge of a new era, they realized their victory was not in forcing submission, but in being recognized as equals. That was the dignity they had sought, not to dominate, but to belong. The unexpected presence of the ancient ships lingered above them all, silent watchers in the void. Their intervention had shifted the course of history. Yet their message had been clear. The real challenge lay beyond the stars, a danger none yet fully understood. Humanity's role was not simply to inspire or resist, it was to prepare, to guide, to ensure the galaxy did not crumble before it ever faced the greater trial. This revelation weighed heavily on every leader, human and council alike. The power to lead was never just an honor. It was a burden. In the days that followed, messages poured in from across the galaxy. Small colonies and distant worlds declared their support for a new alliance built not on dominance, but on shared purpose. Former rivals reached out with offers of trade, cooperation, even defense pacts. The tide had shifted. Where once humanity had stood alone in silence, now they stood at the center of a growing network of trust. It was not perfect, and it would not erase the pain of the past, but it was a beginning. The human fleet returned to its homeworlds not as conquerors, but as guardians. They were greeted not with wild celebration, but with quiet pride. Families reunited, officers laid down their arms, and engineers turned their attention from war machines to projects that would strengthen the lives of ordinary people. The victory was not in battle. It was in the knowledge that they had proven their worth without surrendering their humanity. For the council, the transition was harder. They had to face their people, to explain how their authority had fractured in the face of truth. Some tried to cling to the old ways, but most began to see that the only path forward was through change. They opened their doors, invited voices they had once ignored, and began rebuilding trust in ways they had long neglected. It was not an easy process, but it was necessary. And in that necessity, even the council found a kind of freedom they had not known before. The ancient ships departed quietly, fading back into the void from which they had come. They left no promises, no timeline for the danger ahead, only the reminder that unity would be the only shield strong enough when the time came. Their absence left questions unanswered, but it also left space for hope. Humanity and the Council both understood that the galaxy had been given a chance, one that could not be wasted. In the years that followed, the galaxy transformed. Trade routes reopened, colonies flourished, and alliances once thought impossible became realities. Humanity was no longer an outlier or an upstart. They had become part of the foundation of a new order, one defined not by who sat highest, but by who stood together. The phrase that once echoed through their speeches, "dignity by right," spread across the stars as a reminder of what had been won. The final twist of the story was not in war or politics, but in the ordinary lives of those who had once lived in fear. Children grew up knowing their voices mattered. Workers on forgotten colonies saw supplies and aid arrive where none had before. Scientists and explorers set out again, driven not by orders from above, but by a collective dream to understand the universe before them. The story of humanity was no longer about defiance. It was about belonging, about creating a future where no one was left unheard. Looking back, many would say the moment of climax had not been the fleets facing off, nor the revelation of the ancient powers. The true climax had been the choice humanity made to stand firm without firing the first shot, to show strength without losing compassion. It was that choice, simple yet profound, that had changed everything. The galaxy did not remember the ships that nearly fired, but the ones that chose restraint. That became the turning point written in every history that followed. In the end, the story closed not with the roar of cannons, but with the quiet hum of rebuilding. Humanity had earned its place, the Council had learned its lesson, and the galaxy had taken its first fragile step toward unity. The threat beyond the stars still loomed, but now, when it came, they would not face it as fragments. They would face it as one, and for all the uncertainty that remained, one truth had become clear. The measure of strength was not in how loudly one commanded, nor in how fiercely one fought, but in how deeply one believed in the dignity of every voice. That was humanity's gift to the stars. That was the legacy they left behind. The stars stretched endlessly above, vast and mysterious, carrying both promise and danger. But this time, as the fleets drifted home and the people of the galaxy looked upward, they did not see silence or division. They saw possibility. They saw hope. And in that hope, the story found its ending, not as a conclusion, but as the beginning of something greater.